Welcome to the EASA and Certification Workshop 2021. I'm Markus Görnemann, Deputy Certification Director, and together with my colleague John Franklin, I will be your host today. Due to COVID-19, we organized this year's event in a slightly different way, purely virtual, but the huge number of registrations showed that we met your needs, and we hope that all the topics and discussions will be useful to all of you. I will hand over now to John to give you some more details about the proceedings of today's event.
Thanks, Markus, and welcome everybody to this event. It's great to have so many people connected online. It's a shame that we couldn't all be together in one room, but hopefully next year, things will be different and we'll be able to do that. As you see, we've arranged the logistics here with social distancing and all the various COVID measures here. So yeah, it might make the show quite interesting as we go along with different speakers and question and answers, etc. But hopefully you'll appreciate and enjoy the different discussions we'll have. Hopefully you've had the chance to look at the expert videos on the event website already, and huge thanks to everybody who already raised all the various questions we've had in advance of this event. And I know we've got experts in rooms all over the agency looking forward to answering your questions, and hopefully we'll get more as we go through the event. I'll talk a bit more later on about how you can ask questions during the event using Slido. But without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our Certification Director, Rachel Deschler, who's going to introduce and open this event. Rachel.
Thank you, John, and good morning to all of you. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar, which is the 2021 edition of our traditional EASA certification and DOA workshop. The last edition was back in 2019 and as a physical event here in Cologne. This year we are proposing you a virtual format, and we really hope that you will find it as useful as possible. As said, a number of EASA presentations have been pre-recorded and posted on our website to allow you to watch some of it in advance. Today, in what is the live part of the event, we will give priority to the exchange through several sessions of questions and answers. This direct exchange with you, our stakeholders, is very important for us. We need to know what in what we produce is maybe not clear enough. We need to know about your difficulties and also about what you need from us so that we can do a better job in cooperation with you. This can be about guidance or explanations on current requirements. It can be information on upcoming future rules. It can be about international cooperation aspects if you are dealing with importing, exporting, or about the way we do oversight and certification. I think it's also important to remind us that we are sharing several common objectives through this difficult period of time. The first objective we are sharing is to enable the success of your design activities in a context which remains difficult, where we are trying to progressively return to normal operations, step by step, out of the crisis that COVID has caused for transport and aviation in particular. We are sharing the objective to enable innovation, new technologies, and especially what I would call environmental innovation. And last but not least, we obviously share the common objective to continuously work on improving our safety performance. Let me highlight some of the topics that are covered through the videos or through today's sessions. We will talk about the implementation of Part 21 as we have it today. So, for example, how can we do remote test witnessing, remote auditing as part of our certification and oversight activities to continue able your work and our work in new ways. What is our experience with implementing level of involvement that is recently introduced change in Part 21? And all our DOAs had to implement the necessary procedures, etc., and to start working with it. What is our experience with that? Future evolutions of Part 21, what is coming ahead of us? We will talk about Part 21 Lite, which will be brand new possibilities for the lower end of our products, and also about introduction of safety management systems for design and manufacturing organizations. We will address a number of different technical certification topics, such as the certification of cabin interiors, antennas, changes to composite structure, and more. Under innovation, we will look, for example, into the drone sector and trying to answer in particular the question, when is certification needed? What are the different possibilities for assessing the design aspects of drones? And we will talk also about new environmental requirements that we need to develop for new types of products. I would like to thank you very much for being so many today. You are 2,500 registered participants from more than 90 countries. So clearly the advantage of the virtual format is to be able to reach much more people than physically. The disadvantage is, of course, the lack of direct exchange, but we hope to be able to compensate as much as possible. Thank you for your interest and for the time you are investing in this exchange. And I wish you a productive and enjoyable event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Rochelle. And now we're ready to get on with the main part of the agenda. So we're going to get started, first of all, by talking a little bit about the e-pass. We had a video on that in the videos that were online on the event page. So we have a question on that one of my colleagues will answer, and then we'll be talking about rulemaking changes, Part 21 and Part 21 Lite. So now we're going to get started with the main part of the agenda. The first thing I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about is how you can interact with us, with our experts during the event using our Slido tool. Now, perhaps many of you have used this in previous EASA events, but it's just useful to mention how that works again. So if you go to slido.com and then in the event code as a participant, the code is hashtag CT-DOA 2021. That's CT-DOA 2021. So if you enter that code, you can go into Slido and ask questions of any of our experts on all of the topics that we have in the agenda. Now, some of you might be familiar when we do this in a setting where we have one big conference with some main themes, the questions then come through for voting continually. Obviously, what we're trying to do here is, we've got quite a large number of specific topics. So our colleagues will be managing the filtering of questions through for voting, etc., based on the different topics we're talking about. So you might ask a topic on something that's coming later in the agenda. So if you don't see that, don't worry. It will come through when we get to the different points in the agenda. So it's worth mentioning just so you're not confused why you don't always see the questions coming through the feed. So the first thing we're going to do is say, hopefully you saw the video on the European Plan for Aviation Safety that my colleague Michael Gerhardt, who's responsible for the e-pass in the safety programme section, had made. So Michael, are you there for the first question on the e-pass?
Good morning, John.
Hi, Michael.
Good morning, John.
Great
Yes,
that you
I
could
am.
join us. Hi. So the question comes from Dagmar at Lufthansa Technik, and he asks, could you please elaborate on how to effectively consider DOAs which are not TC holders, and particularly the challenge of the inputs to the process. And that's the first part. I'll come to the other two parts afterwards.
Okay, very welcome. Thank you, John. Yes, indeed, we consult the draft EPAs every year with our advisory bodies. The advisory body structure and composition ensures that we are able to reach out to a wide community of stakeholders, but of course not all organizations may necessarily be represented in associations being present in our advisory body structures. So indeed it may be a little bit more difficult for them to make their voice heard, but their voice is as important as the voices of others. If an organization is not represented in an association which sits in our advisory bodies, they of course have the possibility to organize themselves there. But if they are not possible to do that, if they are not intending to do so, that doesn't mean that we are not able to listen to their voice, that we are not able to listen to their comments. Anybody can make comments at any time on the EPAs. When you see something in the EPAs where you have a comment, please feel free to approach EASA directly and provide us your comments, and then we will consider it when we develop EPAs next time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michael. And for the next question, again from Dagmar, is how do we assess the financial impact of a rulemaking task?
Okay, yes. When we are doing impact assessments in the course of drafting regulatory material, for example, when we do a best intervention strategy or when we are assessing different regulatory options, we do assess the financial impacts, or the term that you will find in our documents is the economic impacts on each option that we have identified as a possible solution, next to the safety impacts, next to the environmental impacts, social impacts, and so on. With regard to those financial impacts, we are, for example, looking at the costs that are necessary for implementing the different options so that we can compare them. Options that we have, for example, may be that we want to require a new design solution, or that we create new obligations, or that we require a certificate or a declaration. So for any of that, we would assess the operating costs, but also the related administrative burden on the business, and also the cost for ensuring compliance. And we do assess that for the whole system, so not only for the regulated entity, the one who has to comply with that, but also for the authority overseeing the organization, the regulated entity, indirect costs potentially for passengers and consumers. We are making these assessments on the basis of the data that we have available, on studies that we have available, databases that we have access to, but we sometimes also do ad hoc surveys with the advisory bodies and also with affected stakeholders. Sometimes you also see that we ask direct questions in our consultation documents, for example, in a draft BIS or in a notice of proposed amendment. And we are seeking their feedback on whether the data that we are using is a good basis for our assessment, or asking stakeholders to provide additional data, further data to support our ongoing impact assessments. And then depending on the availability of data, whether they are quantifiable and whether it's possible to express all of them in monetary terms or only in different various units, we may use different assessment methodologies. What do I mean with that? So we could, for example, if we can express everything in monetary terms, we can do a cost-benefit analysis, which is a clear data-driven support to our decision-making. But if it's not possible to express everything in monetary terms, we have other means to analyze the data. For example, we can do multi-criteria analysis if there are different units that we need to compare. For example, if we need to compare safety impacts in terms of number of avoided fatalities with the economic impact in terms of, for example, workload in hours due to, let's say, for higher or new training requirements. So these are two different methods, cost-benefit analysis, multi-criteria analysis. There are other methodologies that we apply, for example, cost-effectiveness analysis. So that's the typical way on how we are doing our impact assessment. A bit of technicalities on our methodology, but I hope that clarifies Dagmar's question a little bit on how we are doing impact assessment, and in particular the assessment of financial impacts.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Michael. That was a really comprehensive answer, and I'm involved in the process, so yeah, it's really interesting to kind of hear it explained like that. We don't always get the chance to kind of think about it in those terms. So the next and final part of the question is how to achieve competitiveness in the international context. So the example given is in, for example, the US bilateral with a rulemaking task for a European PMA.
Okay, I see. Thanks, John. Yeah, ensuring competitiveness in the international context is a wide subject. So maybe let me focus on the example that you mentioned on the parts manufacturer approval, PMA, which is an approach in the United States. Currently in Europe, in the EASA system, we don't have such a PMA kind of approval. We have to see that the American system and the European system are different. And at the moment, we don't see that it's necessary to introduce something like a PMA kind of approach. We had some years ago done an assessment of that topic. We compared the two systems. We assessed whether it's necessary to introduce a PMA kind of approach also in Europe. Since it's more a level playing field, a competitiveness issue, and not so much a safety issue, we also considered the interests of our stakeholders. We developed different options on how one could implement that in Europe. We compared with the impact assessment methodology the different options. And at the end of that process, we concluded some years ago that there was no action, no need to do rulemaking to require that in Europe. Of course, not having a PMA kind of system in Europe means that there's a difference between the EU and the US. And with the bilateral aviation air safety agreements between the European Union and the United States in place, it may happen, of course, that some PMA parts are accepted in Europe, but that's not currently the case for critical PMA parts. But I would like to focus that we have to compare the systems and not individual measures within the system. So the European system also offers other advantages that are not available in the US system. Like, for example, what we recently introduced in Part 21, the possibility to accept parts without Form 1 or standard changes. So one has to compare the systems and not the individual measures. But if the industry believes that today we need to look at the issue again to check whether there's a competitive disadvantage and whether we need to think about introducing such a system in the EASA system, then I would appreciate if the advisory bodies, the DMTech, the SAB, may provide advice to EASA, how it sees the issue, how it analyzes the issue, and recommend to EASA to further assess or again assess the issue, whether we need to introduce something like a PMA system in Europe.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Michael. That was a really good question, a good answer. And actually, now's a perfect time perhaps just to make a bit of an advertisement for the next version of the European Plan for Aviation Safety that will come out in January next year on the EASA website, and then also on our Together for Safety Promotion community sites. We'll then explain specifically how that relates to then the wider fixed wing community on the Aerops community site, for the rotorcraft community on the rotorcraft community site, and similarly for GA on the GA community site. So good to give a little advertisement there for the EPAS, and a vital document that really drives all of the work that we're doing here in Europe. So thanks very much, Michael. We've got some more questions now. Just first, two short questions on drones that came through. So hopefully if Natalie's there to help us answer these questions. Natalie, are you there?
Yes. Yes, good morning, John. Good morning to everybody.
Hi, Natalie. So Natalie and I are usually the ones both together in front of the camera doing the drone live stream. So it's good to have Natalie here at least for a little while. And so for the first question, Natalie, we've got, in the case where a UAS operator intends to conduct operations in multiple EU states, is there the possibility that EASA can become the competent authority?
Yeah, this is a possibility that is always offered by the basic regulation. So it's the regulation that provides the competency among the European system and the Aviation Authority. So I'm referring to Regulation 2018-1139. And there is a process in the regulation that explains how an organization that conduct operation in different countries in Europe may apply such that EASA may become the competent authority. So this is applicable as in all aviation sector, also for the drone part. So EASA may become the competent authority for the light unmanned US operator certificate.
Perfect, thanks very much. And then for a second question, it's about the SORA, the Standard Operational Risk Assessment. So SORA and the concept of open and specific and the certified category was developed via JARUS to define a common basis for a possible international recognition. Is EASA conducting any activity to monitor differences with the approach used by other authorities in the world, not just to the SORA, to the wider system and all the different parts of the rules across the world to try and foster future harmonisation?
Yeah, so sure. This was our initial approach to work together with all the other authorities in the world through JARUS, exactly for this purpose, in order to have then an approach that may be recognized by other parts of the world. So now maybe people here may be aware that EASA was the first one that introduced directly into the regulation the approach developed by JARUS with the open, specific, and certified, and with the risk assessment using the methodology developed by JARUS, that is the SORA. But now there are other areas in the world that are using and are starting to recognize the same approach. So I'm referring to, for example, to Australia, to Canada, that they recently they published the SORA in their regulatory system. And you may be aware that in the UK, the same regulation applies. So EASA is having some periodical meeting with all these authorities, then including also FAA, to see also what will be the development in the American part, in order to have a methodology that may be harmonized, such that operator having an authorization in different parts of the world, maybe in the future, may have some kind of recognition, and they may do the operation in other countries without any additional verification.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Natalie. And hopefully for those questions, people found them useful and gave, I think, a really good insight into the drone topic there in just a few minutes. So thanks very much for joining us, Natalie. Enjoy the rest of your day. And now we're going to move on in the agenda to talk about the latest rulemaking updates, and specifically Part 21 and Part 21 Lite. And for this, we've got a presentation from my colleagues Rodrigo Priego and Carl Garvey. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Rodrigo.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Priego. I am the Section Manager for Initial Airworthiness Standards and Specifications. The colleagues in this section manage all the regulatory changes affecting Part 21, Part 26, as well as certification specifications. You have heard from Michael Gerhardt, and you have seen in his video how the European Plan for Aviation Safety is developed and how it works. In EPAS, you will find a description and timelines for all our rulemaking activities, also including the changes that are ongoing in certification specifications. I will focus, therefore, the next presentation on changes affecting only Regulation 748/2012, also known as Part 21. And I'm going to be accompanied on the stage by my colleague Carl Garvey, and he's going to give you more details about the latest opinion that we have published, which we call Part 21 Lite. So I'm going to be speaking about regulatory changes that are at different stages on the regulatory process. And I'm going to start speaking about those changes for which a rule or a decision is already in place, and that can therefore start to be implemented almost immediately. And the first change I would like to mention is a decision that we published in March of this year, amending acceptable means of compliance and guidance material to Part 21. This was the outcome of rulemaking task number 31. With this type of effort, on a regular basis, we take the opportunity to close the gap that naturally develops between the rules as we design them and the rules as they are implemented. So this was an opportunity for us to clarify misinterpretations based on feedback that we have received, to improve the text and to align the guidance material with the current practice. We focus this amendment more on issues related to design organizations. We also took the opportunity to address one safety recommendation from an accident that occurred in Norway in 2016, reinforcing the methodology for design approval holders to analyze and report occurrences, especially when there is an early rejection of a part from service. We are about to start a second cycle, amending AMC and guidance material to Part 21, and we will focus this time on issues related with production organizations. The decision that we published took into consideration the comments that we received on an NPA that was issued in 2020, and it became immediately applicable in March of this year, one day after it was published. Later on this year, in April, a new EU regulation was published. This is Regulation 2021-699. And this regulation is the outcome of the 3 rulemaking tasks that you see now on the screen. This regulation addresses 3 topics. The first one allows or clarifies that instructions for continuing airworthiness are now type of the type certificate, with a view to strengthen the control by design approval holders, taking into consideration also the changes that occur to the ICAs. The second topic allows that parts that have a negligible impact on safety can be installed on a product outside of the production environment and therefore without the so-called EASA Form 1. And the third topic requires design approval holders to provide manuals, data, and information related to aging structure failures, mainly having to do with corrosion and fatigue, and that they make those available to the operators who are the ones who have to use them. In the 3 cases, we have developed additional support material to facilitate the implementation of the changes. We are providing, together with the presentation, the links to 2 videos that explain the rationale for the changes and the main amendments related to ICA and Form 1. And we are also giving you the link to a dedicated website in which you will find additional information on aging aircraft, as well as the presentation that we share with those stakeholders impacted when we organize several information sessions later on this year. The regulation is the output of 2 opinions that we published in 2019 and 2016. It amended Part 21, but it also amended Regulation 1321 on continuing airworthiness, for example, to alleviate the need for the parts with a Form 1 to be maintained by a maintenance organization subject to this regulation. Acceptable means of compliance and guidance material in both cases are available. What is a bit special in this regulatory change is that the applicability for the requirements related to aging aircraft has already taken place, so those requirements can already start to be implemented since May of this year. For the amendments to ICA and Form 1, there is a delay on the applicability until May of 2022. With this delay applicability, we intend to provide more time for those who have to implement the changes, also taking into consideration the pandemic context and the difficulties that we are all going through. And finally, in July of this year, another regulation, 2021-1088, was published by the European Commission, and this regulation intends to align our certification procedures for environmental protection with ICAO Annex 16, in particular with the 3 volumes that you see now on the screen, dealing with aircraft noise, aircraft engine emissions, and aircraft CO2. So in 2020, ICAO amended Annex 16. In particular, there was a new standard for non-volatile particulate matter emissions for aircraft engines, as well as many improvements made on the 3 volumes. We also had to amend the basic regulation in its Article 9 to update the reference to the latest amendments of ICAO Annex 16. The changes stem from opinion number 3 published in 2020, and in this case, acceptable means of compliance to Part 21 have already been published. In addition, we also had to amend the certification specifications CS34, CS36, and CS02. The changes are already applicable and can already start to be implemented, and we hope that it contributes to ensure a harmonized level of implementation of environmental protection requirements across the EU. I want to also make you aware that all the changes that I just mentioned have been included in our e-rules database, which means that the consolidated versions of the rules that you are hopefully used to, in which you find the requirements and the AMC and GM next to each other, have already been updated, so you are welcome to consult them. I also want to make you aware that you have now the possibility to navigate our e-rules database on a more dynamic format by searching a specific context and allow you to establish filters, and we hope that it will contribute to make the requirements more accessible for the ones who have to use them. So with this part, I conclude the changes for which the regulatory process has finished, and I'm going to start talking about 3 opinions that we have published and for which the discussions are still ongoing between the European Commission and the Member States. The first opinion is related to the introduction of safety management systems in Part 21 and Part 145. In summary, for Part 21, the proposal is to complement the existing design assurance system for design organizations or quality management system for production with the elements of Annex 19. And the changes we propose are limited and are aligned with regulations that have already been adopted in other domains. So we have already SMS requirements introduced for air operators, for continuing airworthiness management organizations, for aerodromes, and so on and so forth. So we try to align them to the extent possible with the changes that have already been adopted, taking into consideration the particularities Part 21. The changes stem from an opinion that we published in December of last year. In the case of Part 145, the related EU regulation has been published this month. For Part 21, the EASA committee provided a positive vote on the changes, and now the Commission is about to start the adoption process, which usually takes several months. And this is why you see now on the slides some timelines that are in green. And we have to take this with a bit of caution because this part of the process is not entirely within our control. So we are providing at the moment our best estimate on when the regulations will come into place. For SMS, we expect that the Part 21 changes will be published in the first quarter of 2022. And as you see, there will be a 1-year delay on the applicability, so they will become applicable in 2023. At that time, authorities can start to raise findings, and organizations will have 2 years to close those findings, which means full implementation in 2025. In parallel, we are working on developing acceptable means of compliance and guidance material, which we hope will be published in time that the regulation is published by the European Commission. The second opinion that I would like to mention was published in June of this year and has to do with protecting the aviation system from what we call information security risks. So information security related events and incidents impacting information technology and data that is used for civil aviation purposes. The opinion proposes provisions both for authorities and organizations, not only production and design, so not only Part 21, but impacting all domains. So it also provides requirements for air operators, for continuing airworthiness management organizations, for training organizations, with a view to have a harmonized approach. It's a horizontal rule, if we can call it that. The opinion that proposed the amendments is opinion number 3 of this year. Here, the discussions between the Commission and the Member States are a bit less advanced, and we think that the regulation will not be published before the 3rd quarter of 2022. The proposal contains, again, a 1-year delay in the applicability, so 2023, and another year to close the findings. But again, this is still subject to discussion with the Commission and States. Here also, we are working on acceptable means of compliance and guidance material that we expect to have ready at the time the rule is published. We recognize that in the case of safety management systems and information security management systems, we're introducing big changes in the system, and we need to accompany the changes with communication campaign, especially when AMC and GM are published, with proper training for those who have to implement the changes, and this includes also EASA as the competent authority, as well as pilot projects. And I think if you have seen the video from Julian Hall on DOA, he mentioned also this. The idea here is that we have started to engage with a limited number of design organizations to learn, especially from the ones who already have a management system approved for other domains, or that voluntarily are implementing SMS or information security provisions, and how this is working, especially as well for small organizations, whether the proposals we are making are proportionate and can be implemented, explore synergies between safety and security, and draw lessons learned, adjust our approach when needed, and also train the colleagues impacted. The third opinion that we have published this year is the outcome of Rulemaking Task 727. This is our Part 21 light opinion, and for this I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Carl Garvey, who has been managing this work from the beginning. Carl.
Thank you, Rodrigo, for that introduction. I'm very pleased today to present the topic on Part 21 Light. It's a very exciting opinion and change for EASA. It's going to provide some much needed proportionality for the general aviation community. And thanks to the amendment to the basic regulation in 2018, we now have those tools, the regulatory tools, to provide those much needed proportionality amendments to Part 21. So, for a certain scope of product within the general aviation domain that are used primarily for sports and recreational use, there are three options now available to the manufacturer or designer of these aircraft. They can use the standard type certification process, which is currently existing within Part 21, and there they can use the alleviations for ELA 1 and ELA 2, and that will result in a type certificate being issued and a certificate of airworthiness being issued for each individual aircraft. We're going to keep those in place, and they are still remain an option for those manufacturers and designers who wish to continue using those. However, within Regulation 748/2012, we've constructed a dedicated annex, so-called Part 21 Light, where there are two additional options available to manufacturers and designers of these simple aircraft. They can use the light certified process, which is a more proportionate and product-focused means of achieving a type certificate. It's worth noting this is the same type certificate issued through the standard type certification process. So they can use that, and then it results in a certificate of airworthiness being issued for each individual aircraft. Within Part 21 Light, for a limited scope of product, we would also permit the use of a declaration using the declaration process. This is a declaration made by the manufacturer and designer of the aircraft that states that the aircraft is in compliance with the technical specifications that EASA has permitted for the use of this process. It results in a declaration of design compliance under the sole responsibility of the declarant. It's worth noting there's no verification by EASA in the compliance demonstration process, and it's under the sole responsibility of the declarant. For individual aircraft, that results in a restricted certificate of airworthiness being issued. The reason why it's restricted is because the basic regulation states that if a design has been declared, then only a restricted certificate of airworthiness can be issued. So you can see with these different options, we've lowered the barrier into the EASA regulatory system, and now there are proportionate steps which enable the progression of aircraft and designers wishing to move from the traditional Annex 1 aircraft into the EASA regulatory structure. I'd like to talk briefly about the scope of products we permit. You can see on the left-hand side there for the light declared aircraft process, there's a more limited scope. And that's because, as I mentioned, there is no involvement of EASA in the verification of compliance, and it's under the responsibility of the declarant. We believe we've got the right balance in terms of exposure to numbers of occupants and the weight and the type of simple products that can be permitted under the declared process. On the right-hand side, you'll see for the light certified process, there's a much wider scope. And that's because of EASA's involvement in the verification of compliance and because a type certificate is issued at the end of that. We have bound the risk in terms of number of occupants and the weight, but we believe that we've got the right balance between the risk of the product and the complexity of the product and the ability to use the alleviations within Part 21 Light. Of course, in the future, we may re-clarify these based on our experience gained during the process. Within Part 21 Light, there are some novelties, and I mentioned the use of new tools within the basic regulation. There are some subtle changes, but I'd like to focus mainly on the big fundamental changes within Part 21 Light. On the left-hand side, you can see, as I mentioned, instead of a type certificate, we now permit the declaration of design compliance under the responsibility of the person making the declaration. For design, we do not require any formal design organisation requirements. There's no requirements for a DOA or an AP DOA. However, the designer does have obligations and responsibilities similar to a design organisation approval holder. For production, there's no requirement for a POA, and we have developed a set of minimum production requirements which will ensure the conformity of each individual product, and the production organisation still has responsibilities similar to a production organisation approval holder. In terms of intervention, I mentioned there's no verification by EASA of the compliance of the design. However, we have two main intervention points to ensure the safety of the product. The first intervention point is the safety review prior to first flight and prior to issuance of the permit to fly and the flight conditions. EASA, along with the national authority, will conduct a joint oversight visit of the manufacturer to ensure the product is safe for first flight. And when we have no findings, then the agency will issue the flight conditions and the national authority will issue the permit to fly. Then at the end of the compliance demonstration process, again, EASA and the national authority will convene and visit the manufacturer and conduct a first article inspection. And if there are no findings raised during the first article inspection, EASA registers the declaration of design compliance and the national authority issues the first restricted C of A. On the right-hand side, you can see for the light certified process, as I mentioned, a full EASA type certificate is issued at the end of the process. There is no type certificate light or light type certificate, it's a full type certificate. However, the means to achieve that is more product focused, and I'll mention that in a second. We would allow the possibility as an alternative to a DOA for a declared design organisation under the oversight of the agency, and that this is a significant novelty introduced by the basic regulation. Likewise, for production, we would permit the use of a declaration for production and an organisation becoming a declared production organisation as an alternative to a POA, again, under oversight from the competent authority, national authority. In terms of intervention points, as I mentioned, there is verification of the design. However, we would like to focus our verification activities into two main intervention points in a similar way to the declared process. So under the light certified process, the first intervention point is before first flight. Again, EASA and the national authority would convene and conduct an oversight visit of the designer and manufacturer of that aircraft, and we would conduct a critical design review prior to issuance of the flight conditions and the first permit to fly. At the end of demonstration of compliance, again, EASA and the national authority will conduct a first article inspection to verify compliance, and then when there are no findings raised, EASA will issue the type certificate and the national authority will issue the first certificate of airworthiness. As you can see, I mentioned on my first slide, this is a significant departure from the existing Part 21 process, and we believe it provides some much needed proportionality. As I briefly mentioned, in terms of design capability requirements, under Part 21 Light certified, we would have two options, either a declared design organisation or an existing DOA holder can use their existing approval in the same way as they do for Part 21, and they would have the full privileges they currently have under Part 21. However, under Part 21 Light, because we're using declared design organisations, because of the basic regulation states there are no possibilities for privilege to be issued to declared organisations. As I noted, for the declared process, the Light declared process, there are no formal design organisation requirements. For production, for the Light certified process, for type certified aircraft, there are two possibilities. An organisation can become a declared production organisation under oversight from the national authority, or they can use their existing production organisation approval in the same way and enjoy the privileges they currently have under Part 21. For the Light declared process, I mentioned this a new possibility where we have defined a set of minimal production organisation requirements, and we've put those under subpart R. So an organisation could use those as an alternative to a declaration or an approval. However, if they want to become a declared production organisation, that's permitted under Part 21 Light, or they can use an existing production organisation approval. Hopefully you can see the logic there is we would not prevent an existing approval holder from using the benefits of Part 21 Light. It would simply not be logical. Where are we? I'm pleased to inform you that the IAS opinion was published at the end of October, opinion 5/2021, and you can find that on our website. We're in the process of the comitology process with Brussels and the European Commission and the Member States, and we're hoping, again this is tentative, depending on the route through the process, expecting to publish the approved regulation Q4 2022, and the applicability date would be 1 year after that publication date. You can find a link to a more detailed presentation on Part 21 Light with video and with voiceover by following the link you can see on the screen here, and there you can have a much more detailed explanation. I'd like you to hand back to Rodrigo to conclude the rest of the presentation on Part 21.
Thank you, Carl. So you're probably wondering now what is up next. We wanted to conclude the presentation by giving you a slight preview on what will likely be the next change to Part 21. And as you could maybe anticipate, it will be in the domain of unmanned aircraft systems. If you have seen the video by my colleague Natale Di Rubo, he has the same slides to tell you that we are now reviewing our regulatory framework to adapt it to specific types of operation, the so-called specific category with high risks, as well as manned urban air mobility. And to enable these operations, we will have to review our regulations in several domains, and we intend to publish an NPA in the first quarter of next year. This NPA will also contain changes to Part 21. One of the new entities that we have to fit into Part 21 and we have to certify is the so-called common unit. So at the moment, we have discussions ongoing on how to go about this, and we will make a proposal containing an NPA that will be published in the first quarter of next year. We look forward to your comments. He has also mentioned that we will have to again review our rules to make them suitable for another type of operation, which are unmanned urban air mobility types of operations and the so-called IFR cargo. For that, we will have another set of proposals, and this will not come before 2023. And with this, we conclude the overview on Part 21. As you have seen, there are many rulemaking activities going on around Part 21. So we hope that with this information, now you're able to navigate our regulatory proposals and that you found it useful. And maybe now we have an opportunity to try to answer a few questions.
Fantastic, Rodrigo. Thanks for that, both Carl and Rodrigo. Hopefully that our audience, I'm sure, found that really interesting. Certainly I know I did watching it here in the studio. So hopefully that was really helpful. So we've got a number of questions that came in before from the videos and things like that. So the first one actually for you, Rodrigo, on SMS. from Salvatore Mancino from Logic is, what is the status and the roadmap for the SMS approach, and is it at the moment not something for DOA and ADOA?
So I refer back to my presentation. We expect the EU regulations in proposing changes to Part 21 for SMS to be published in the first quarter of next year, with a 1-year delay on the applicability. In the proposal, and this was the outcome of our impact assessment, SMS will be applicable only to approved design or production organizations. It will not apply to those organizations that are using alternative procedures. Just to remind you that there will be additional 2 years until 2025, hopefully, for organizations to close any findings raised by authorities.
Fantastic, thanks for that one. And then the next question is another one on SMS from Nusret from Turkish Airlines Technic, who asks, when will the pilot projects for SMS be completed? Is it before 2023 quarter one, so that the pilot project results are possible to review for the implementation and sample best practice applications?
So as I explained also in the presentation, now we have 2 speeds for SMS and information security. SMS regulations will probably be there first, and therefore we hope that pilot projects related to SMS will therefore be advanced, hopefully finished by the first quarter of 2023. And this will be a check whether the AMC and GM that we are proposing are fit for purpose, or whether we will have to find alternatives to facilitate implementation. The ones for information security will therefore be delayed somehow.
Okay, and actually there's kind of a follow-on question also from somebody that, has there been any consideration, I know you talked about the timelines, in pushing the SMS implementation to the right even further? Obviously for industry in challenging times, there's an administrative burden in implementation that perhaps particularly impacts small DOAs. So maybe you can say something about that?
So this is why we have this delay applicability of 1 year. We have started to do this more and more during the pandemic context to allow for additional time to comply with the rules. Like I said, we have additional 2 years for full compliance. We are working on AMC and GM that hopefully will not be the same for big organizations versus small organizations, and this is one check that we need to do, whether for small organizations we can make it proportionate to them, and this is also behind our pilot projects, that we can learn whether it's like a checkpoint that what we are proposing is really helping, or we need to reconsider. So we think that with these tools we will facilitate the implementation. However, we will be monitoring this very closely, and any problems that arise, we will tackle it.
Fantastic, and I think this is where the work we do in my safety promotion team, supporting our technical experts to then help you as the wider industry with the implementation, with all of these extra materials to help people understand what they have to do. I think that's really helpful, isn't it?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's all the questions we have beforehand. Now we can move perhaps to the Slido with a few more minutes. So it seems like that first question's quite popular there in terms of the upvoting. Can you answer that one, Rodrigo? So the question is, can you give an example of which kinds of parts are acceptable without a Form 1? Maybe Carl, Rodrigo.
I can help.
Yeah.
Shall I give it a try?
Please.
So I think in one of my slides I was showing an in-flight entertainment system as an example of such kind of parts. But here the idea is that there's no predefined leaks. The responsibility is with the design approval holder, that have to make an assessment whether a non-compliance during production will result on an effective in operations, and based on that there will be a relaxation of a requirement. Also, I would like to emphasize the fact that because we don't have an EASA Form 1, it doesn't mean that the part is not controlled. It's outside the production, the aviation production environment, but of course there are parts that are designed not necessarily only for aviation, and therefore during the production they have to comply with design data, and we also have the possibility to give additional instructions to the installer to accomplish for the installation of such part, even without an EASA Form 1.
Anything to add, Carl?
Not particularly. I was saying, please have a look at Regulation 2021-699. You can see the criteria for when a part can be classified without an EASA Form 1.
Fantastic. And actually, one thing that's useful to mention here is when, even for all of these questions that we have here, and even particularly also ones we don't answer, we use them to go back then and see how we can improve the Q&A that we have on the website, so that all of these questions that you're thinking of and that you have, are not just kind of answered once and forgotten, that we use it to continually improve the information we have available to you in industry. And actually, huge congratulations to Stefan for, we'll see whether during the session 101 upvotes is beaten during the question. So huge thanks for that question. I think on the DOA one that's top there, I think maybe we skip that to when we have the DOA session a bit later on with other colleagues. But perhaps maybe for you, Carl, from Richard's question, who asks, could you please outline the plans of harmonising Part 21 light activities with the current regulatory activities for UAS?
I can briefly start, but I'd like to hand over to Rodrigo as well, who's more au fait with what's happening with the drones regulation. Obviously, with Part 21 Light, we've maximised the use of the regulatory tools within the basic regulation for declared organisations, for declared design organisations, declared production organisations, and we'd very much like to explore how we can use those for other proportionate products. However, I believe in terms of how we're going to apply those to unmanned air systems, it hasn't been fully determined yet. Rodrigo, would you like to clarify?
Yes. We did explore the synergies between the Part 21 Light proposal and regulations for drones, especially initially we thought that we could apply Part 21 Lights for the specific category. But as you have seen from Carl's presentation, Part 21 Light is tailored to a specific type of products, which we consider low risk, and therefore immediately we thought that this would not be necessarily the case for drones on the specific category. So for drones, we have an approach based on the risk of the operation. For the specific category, it's the responsibility is with national authorities who have to provide an authorization. And here, EASA has come up with an approach in which for certain cases and upon request, we can issue a design verification that can be on the drone itself or, for example, on containment measures. And we can verify that. We can issue a report that we provide to the national authority, and the national authority with our report will then issue an authorization. I'm talking about the specific category. For the certified category, as I mentioned, this will be entirely within Part 21, and we are now reviewing how we need to review the process already contained in Part 21 to enable that. So we will basically build our proposal on existing control mechanisms for certification.
Okay, that makes sense. Fantastic, thanks. And maybe the PMA question, is that something that we can answer, or maybe we better leave that to some of our colleagues a bit later on?
I think we have already addressed that through Michael. So the question was, what's your view on PMA parts? The reason, because, the PMA question, I think Michael did cover that quite well in his session. I'm just looking down the list of questions that I have, because there's quite a few questions that are for other ones. I'm just seeing if there's anything specific, particularly related to Part 21. It's an interesting one here, perhaps, on Part 21 from Gerhard, who asks, as the European market is for most manufacturers only a small part of their deliveries, how is the international acceptance for Part 21 planned or perhaps discussed with bilateral partners? Has there been any discussion on Part 21 Light? Specifically,
what was the question relating particularly to Part
21 Light?
Part 21 Light, yes. So we've engaged with our international partners, and we're exploring the impact on the TIP and BASA with our FAA counterparts. Although at this point we don't see any significant impact. Our international partners are using different means to achieve a similar goal for proportionality, and we've shared our thoughts and our direction with them.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much. Maybe the question about SMS there. So there's a question from Muriel who asks, how does EASA plan to monitor SMS via DOA, POA, MOA audits, or are there specific SMS audits planned?
The short answer is that it's a bit early to say. As I said, the preparation of the oversight is part of the effort that needs to happen. If we look at how this has been done in other domains, we have embedded the audit mechanism in existing oversight activities. But of course, SMS is a different kind of animal. In the ops domain, we talk about assessments, and for that, we have a specific methodology and we have a specific training. So really, this is something that we need to face in, how we're going to evaluate an SMS and to train audit inspectors and those of the NAs on how to do it.
Okay, fantastic, thanks. So I think hopefully we covered a good range of questions there. The presentation was very comprehensive, and what we will be doing after this event, and we always get this question a lot, is that all of the presentations that you see and the different parts of this event will be online fairly soon after, so you can review it or share specific bits with your colleagues if there's something you want to share with other people. So that's always possible. So we've reached a kind of a natural break in the discussions here. We're going to come back, take a 15-minute break, and come back at 11:15. So if you could be back in front of your computers, wherever you are, in 15 minutes, ready to go, and we're going to continue all of the discussions. We've got lots of great topics coming up, all the stuff on DOA, military, lots of really technical topics with some great experts. So we look forward to seeing you with a fresh cup of coffee fairly shortly. Thanks very much. See you soon.